I believe we're live. Now it still says starting. We're live. All right. How are we doing this morning, everybody? This is the thing when you run it live. You have no idea what is going to happen when you're running live. So, good morning, everybody. I hope that everybody's doing well this morning out there in quarantine land. Okay. If you are quarantined, I do hope that you are staying healthy and staying safe. If you are watching this while you are at work, while you are either working hybridly or remotely, please pay attention for about the next 40 minutes or so. We're going to talk about today leading remote teams through accountability. Not necessarily toward accountability, not necessarily towards more accountability, but through accountability. This is one of those topics that, even in the best of times, is really hard for people to wrap their brain around, right? It's really hard for people to accept, right? This is one of those topics where it's really hard for people to, even in the best of times, really figure out, like, well, how do I actually, make people be accountable? That's a popular question for me as a trainer and a facilitator. And the problem with even the formulation of that question is where we're going to go today. You can't make people be accountable. However, you can encourage people to be responsible. And when you're leading people remotely who have a lot of autonomy on the other end of the phone or on the other end of the video or on the other end of the email, what that means is you're giving people a lot of reasons. Not you're giving people a lot of reasons. As a leader, you have to consider what are the kinds of environments we're setting up? What are the kinds of cycles we're seeking to break? What even are the kinds of attitudes and postures that we're seeking to amend, right? Inside of remote work, right? What are we seeking to actually do with the work that we're given, right? What are we seeking to do with the team that we've been given? What are we seeking to do with the time that we're given with the team? So all these are areas that we're going to talk about today. Why does this matter? Well, when you're leading remote teams and it's the first time that you've ever led a team that's now working remotely, it may be very difficult for you to be thinking about, as a leader, accountability. You might have to trust the team, and that's something that we're going to talk about today. Trust is huge. It's huge in face-to-face communication. It's huge in a physical environment where you don't have a remote team. It's huge all over. And actually, the vast majority of teams and the vast majority of individuals on teams will say, I don't trust my team member, or I don't trust my supervisor, or I don't trust my organization. And when there's an absence of trust, then there's a fear of conflict. When there's a fear of conflict, then there is a decline in results. When there's a decline in results, there's also a moving away from accountability and a pulling back from accountability. And so one of the things that we have to look at is that presence of a lack of trust, right? That presence of a lack of ability to believe what is being said and then to follow through on what is being asked of you by either a leader or by other team members. And so accountability is one of these coin of the realm things. I know I say that a lot, but it's one of these coin of the realm things, kind of along with written communication and leading teams through conflict and understanding emotional intelligence, that all leaders have to know something about in order to man remote teams and lead remote teams effectively. Here's what we're going to cover today in detail. So first thing that we're going to talk about is the difference between accountability and responsibility. Both of those things are not the same. And so we're going to talk about the differences between them. And there's subtle differences, but there are differences nonetheless. We're going to talk about the victim cycle. And specifically, we're going to put that in the context of this book. So I do have a couple of books here today, as I did last time. This is our first book, The Oz Principle, okay? Getting and Results Through Individual and Organizational Accountability by Roger Connors, Tom Smith, and Craig Hickman. This is quite probably the best book I've ever read about accountability and about responsibility and about the differences between the two. Published back in 2004, I believe. You can go and pick it up on Amazon or on Audible Books. I would encourage you to do that while you're quarantining and chilling. I would encourage you to take in a couple of business books as well, because this will help you become a better leader and help you lead your team towards accountability, towards responsibility in a more dynamic way. These guys created they created an organization called Partners in Leadership, and you can go check them out online. Partnersinleadership.com, I believe, is their website, and they are fabulous. And we're going to talk about how they lay out the victim cycle. We're going to talk about what the victim cycle actually means, and we're going to talk about how to break out of the victim cycle. The other book that I would like to reference here, and it's kind of an odd book, and most people usually reject it, but it is useful for understanding the extreme end of accountability. And so the extreme end of accountability is ownership. And I'm a big fan of this guy. I listen to his podcast. He has a lot of free resources floating around. I follow him on Instagram, and he doesn't do too much on Facebook. But I listen to his podcasts, and he has a unique style and a unique approach because he spent 20 years in Special Forces, specifically the Navy SEALs. And so he has a really interesting perspective on what accountability, ownership, and responsibility look like, particularly on small teams. See, the difference between a small team and a large team is this. On a small team, mediocrity has nowhere to hide. Matter of fact, I heard an entrepreneur say that back during the good times on CNBC one day. He was asked, why don't you want your team to grow larger than X size? And he looked at the interviewer who was asking him this question, and he said, well, as a team gets larger and larger, mediocrity has more and more of a place to hide. And that's absolutely the truth. And this guy, whose book I'm about to show you here, whose book cover I'm about to show you here, really embodies that idea that small is the new big, and that on small teams, a hyper level of accountability to each team member and a hyper level of responsibility and a hyper level of ownership really matter in order to have success. So this book right here, Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win, by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. This book is amazing. I would highly recommend it if you already have a remote team that already has a high level of responsibility and accountability. If they're already doing those things, even on a hybrid team where you have people who are just taking advantage of this new ability to be autonomous and they're really thriving, you may want to pick this up and take a look at this one. Okay. This book is really fabulous. And like I said, the guy has a great podcast. His podcast really focuses on military stuff. And so he does put leadership inside of a military context because, quite frankly, that's what he knows. And so when he puts it inside of that context, it may not necessarily ring true if you are, say, in a nonprofit, if you're leading a nonprofit team, or if you are in, let's say, the healthcare fields, right? It may grate on you a little bit. And I've gotten some feedback from folks to say, hey, I don't want to know anything about that military stuff because it makes me feel not great. Or, well, what they do in the military is different than what we do over here because they're able to, discipline people. Or, what they do over there in the military doesn't really apply to what we do here because they have hierarchy and command and control. And those are very common ways of looking at military leadership, but those don't apply when you're talking about special forces. Special forces teams, I don't care whether they are Marine Recon, whether they're the Navy SEALs, whether they're Delta, whether they're the Air Force's Special Forces. I don't care which special forces branch of the military you're looking at with special forces. Those teams very much resemble what you do at work, except the thing that they're doing for work is killing people and breaking things. And that's, kind of really like at a bald level what they're doing. But at a tactical level and at a strategic level, they think of leadership in exactly the same way that you do. And there's a lot of insights that can be gleaned from people like Jocko Willink and Leif Babin or Lieutenant Marquardt. I have his book on back there about leading submariners and folks like that. There's a lot of things that can be gleaned, a lot of insights that can be gleaned from these kinds of books and from these kinds of individuals. And so I would encourage you to pick it up. Okay, so those are the two books that we're going to pull most of our information about moving past the victim cycle and into accountability from today. And then we're going to talk about remote responses and reactions. What do you do as a leader, right? What are the things that you need to know in order to lead effectively, in order to move people in a remote environment at a practical level in a remote environment towards accountability? Growing towards accountability and growing through accountability and leading a team through accountability is a delicate step-by-step process. And for you as the leader, there will be a lot of frustration. I will guarantee that. There will be a lot of disappointment. I will guarantee that. There will be a lot of follow-up, and it will be very high touch, such as it were. I can guarantee that. But at the end of the day, if you can do this successfully, your team will come back right into an in-person model, or even be able to work better in a hybrid model in the future after we return to whatever it is we may return to, whatever the, and I've already said I don't like this phrase before, so you already know this, but whatever the new normal, right, might be on the other side of coronavirus and COVID-19 or any other disruption that may come to your workplace. All right, so let's get started. When we think about accountability, we have to think about what the definitions of accountability are, but then we also have to think about the definitions of this other word here. So I'm going to write these two words down, and I'm going to put them up, as I usually do, on the board. Happy little trees. Yeah, Bob Rossing it. All right, so accountability versus responsibility, right? Okay, let's talk about those two things, just very briefly, all right? So accountability is something that's usually put on somebody, right? You may want to write that down. Accountability is something that is put on somebody. Usually accountability comes in the phraseology, usually from leaders to followers like this. I'm going to make you be accountable, or I'm going to make you take accountability. Very rarely does a leader frame accountability like this. We're going to all be accountable. Okay, sometimes you hear that, but very often, particularly in face-to-face and in physical environments, it's very much a mandate, okay? Accountability is something that's mandated from the leader to the follower. Responsibility, on the other hand, is something that you put on yourself. Think about how you think about responsibility, even in your own life. Forget just being at work, just in general. How do you think about responsibility? Most of us look at responsibility, whether it's at work or in our personal life, we look at that as something that we take on ourselves. We don't have to be told to, usually, we don't have to be told to feed our kids, right? We don't have to be told to dress ourselves before we leave the house. We don't have to be told to, I don't know, well, some of us have to be told to drive the speed limit. I won't use that one. That's probably not great. But most of us don't have to be told to show up to work on time, right? That's something that we take responsibility for. And obviously, the older and older we get, the more and more responsibilities we take on. Think about even just how I phrased that last sentence. We take on responsibility, but accountability is usually something that's thrust upon us. I'm not the purveyor of this idea. This was sort of dropped on me like a ton of bricks by a guy named Seth Godin. He's been writing for many, many years on marketing and leadership and mindset and thinking. And he does a lot of projects and writes a lot of books, writes a lot of blog posts, and you can go check him out. Seth, you just put him into your favorite search engine, Seth Godin, Godin. He wrote a blog post once, a very short one that got me really thinking about this, about the differences between accountability and responsibility. And he made that larger point. Accountability is usually something put on you, and responsibility is something that you put on yourself. You take on yourself. That's a distinction with a difference. And so if you're leading remote teams, my first recommendation out of the many that I'm going to make over the next 30 minutes or so is going to be careful with your language. Do you want people to take on accountability? Now you're mixing metaphors. Maybe you want them to take responsibility, and you're going to give them, or you're going to make them accountable for a particular outcome or for a particular goal. And particularly when we're working with remote teams, clarity of language really matters, particularly when we get to things like expectations, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. All right, so that's the accountability and responsibility piece. Let's move on to what happens when there's no accountability, even remotely, right, on a team. Where are people at when there's no accountability? What do we call that? And that's where we get into, like I was saying before, the work of these guys, the Oz principle, right? And so they talk about several areas. I'm going to use a lot of their language and their terminology, and I'm going to frame it in a way that should hopefully be helpful for you when you're leading a remote team. Let me take a sip of water first, though. So the folks who wrote the Oz principle and who founded Partners in Leadership have an interesting idea. They say that many people, actually they say all people, occasionally fall into what they call the victim cycle. And the victim cycle is patterns of behavior that occur when individuals feel victimized, right? When they feel as though events are happening to them, where they feel as though they are not in control, when they feel as though they're being trapped in a swirl of disruption. And there are many people who might be communicating on your team right now in that space. And so they lay out the victim cycle and they lay out the 6 parts of it, right? And so the first part of the victim cycle is this. And I'm going to be very brief with all 6 of these. And of course, you can go on partnersinleadership.com and grab their free resources and look at more of these. So the first one is this one: ignore, deny. The guys at Partners in Leadership, the folks at Partners in Leadership, basically say, listen, people for the most part in a victim cycle will ignore or will deny reality. Okay, they will do that in order not only to avoid accountability but also to avoid responsibility, because if they don't know what the reality is, then maybe they don't have to be accountable for it, right? Maybe they don't even have to be responsible for it. Maybe somebody else will pick up the slack. So ignore, deny is the first one. The second step in the victim cycle is, I love this one. Find this one out a lot when you go to organizations where there's a low level of trust. And this one rings out quite a bit. It's not my job to fix the problem, okay? This one's really, really interesting. It's not my job, because here's the thing. If job functions are clearly defined, right? And if you're in a command and control hierarchy, or here's a big one, if you're in a hierarchy with low trust, and by the way, here's where trust really kicks in. And this is from the work, I'm going to grab this book right here, even though I didn't grab it previously. This is from the work of Patrick Lencioni, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And what he talks about, and I'm going to flip right to it because it's marked. He talks about, in his model, about on a team where it's not my job really kicks in. And it's right here in the book. Okay, I love this, right? This graphic right here, and you all can't see it, but I'm going to read it. What he says is, basically on a team where it's not my job is the primary way of avoiding or denying accountability and even responsibility. He says this: there's an absence of trust among team members. And I'm going to quote directly from him from the book. Quote, essentially, this stems from their unwillingness to be vulnerable within the group. Team members who are not genuinely open with one another about their mistakes and weaknesses make it impossible to build a foundation for trust. If there's no trust, then it's easy to say, it's not my job, and thus I can't be accountable for any outcomes, and move on. From it's not my job, we move to the third area in the victim cycle that the folks of the Oz principle talk about, and it's this one. And you see this again in dysfunctional teams. You see it in teams where there's, again, a low level of trust, where there's a high level of a lack of accountability, okay? It's this one. Finger pointing. It's Bob's job over there, or it's Susie's job over there, or yeah, I know I should have gotten it, but it's da-da-da-da over here, or it's this circumstance over there. That's, again, a space where accountability is going to be lacking, right? And that's the third stage in the victim cycle, finger pointing. Over here, and over here, and over here. Finger pointing everywhere, but here. The fourth stage in the victim cycle that the folks at the Oz principle talk about is this one. And this is my personal favorite, actually. I love this one. This one's really sophisticated because it hides. It hides inside of the absence of trust, but it also hides inside of finger pointing. I even see this sometimes with my own children. All right. Confusion / tell me what to do. At the fourth stage in the victim cycle, confusion / tell me what to do is this stage where if I don't know what it is I need to do, then surely I can't be accountable for any outcomes that may need to happen. Because if I don't know, then I don't have any direction. And if I don't have any direction and you didn't provide any, then guess what? That's it. It's over. I can't do anything about it. I can't possibly be held accountable, or I can't possibly take responsibility. Ignore, deny. It's not my job. Finger pointing. Confusion / tell me what to do. Now we're going to get into the fifth and sixth stages of the victim cycle, and then we're going to talk about how to move past it, right? What are the tools that a leader needs in order to get teams through this, okay? The fifth stage in the victim cycle is this one, and we all know this acronym. CYA. Very politely in the book, they don't use A. But very politely in the Oz principle, they talk about how covering your tail is the fifth stage in the victim cycle. Cover your tail is, of course, about making up excuses about why a thing failed, even before it fails. We see this in the space of people using email at work to draft excuses for why a project failed, even before it is launched. We sometimes see this in meetings where people will list every single negative thing possible for why an idea can't work, rather than offering solutions or offering alternatives, or even, to paraphrase from the old REM song, just declining to speak in general. We see CYA in even, dare I say, even in these times, government work, right? When we talk about linchpins, when we talk about bureaucrats, when we talk about sometimes folks even in large corporations that can behave bureaucratically, right? This is an example of what that entrepreneur was talking about. And we see it in teams at scale, but we also see it in small teams. But as the team gets larger, it becomes more endemic because people are seeking to preserve their own security because they're afraid, quite frankly, sometimes of losing their job, or they're afraid of the environment that they are in, not supporting them taking accountability and action. And then the last stage in the victim cycle that the guys talk about, that the folks at Partners in Leadership and the Oz Principle talk about, is this. And this one bites me all the time. We'll just wait and see if things get better. Wait and see is the ultimate spot in avoiding accountability in the victim cycle. Well, if we just sit on our hands, surely it will get better. I believe the term that's used in the book, if I can remember it correctly, it's been a couple of years since I fully read through it, was sort of like waiting for a wizard, right? Or a magician to come by and save us. Well, as I tell live groups often, and I'll say it here on the live stream, we don't live in the world of Harry Potter, and there is no magic. There's no magician. There's no spells. There's no magic wands. And there's also no magic bullets. All of this requires work in order to get in and in order to get out the kinds of outcomes that we want when we're trying to lead teams, not only to accountability, but trying to understand where we are at in the victim cycle. Now, the guys at the Oz Principle don't just talk about what the victim cycle is. They talk about what are the things we need to do in order to get out of it, right? And so they mention 4 areas that we need to focus on. And I want to emphasize a couple of different things. And then I want to talk about, in closing, as we begin to wrap up, maybe what are some practical things that you can do as a leader to lead people through and toward more accountability in a remote environment where they may have a high level of autonomy and you may not be able to see them on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. And by the way, you can still apply these tips to people when they come back to you in a physical space. All right. If you want to move people out of the victim cycle, the first thing you have to do is you have to get them to see the problem, see the thing that they need to be accountable for. But the big thing about seeing it is people need the courage to see it. That's number one. The courage to see it is huge. And actually the key word there is courage. Kind of like the cowardly lion, how he needed, courage in order to be successful. Well, just like with the cowardly lion, just like with the ways in which we approach just like the ways in which we approach developing teams, we have to really look at and we have to really think about how do we engage people around the courage to see it. And by the way, the book makes a good point. If you engage with people with the courage to see it and you get them to see the problem, you will have amazing success as a leader getting them to accountability. Courage is the first thing. In an absence of courage, right, then most people are blind. After they have the courage to see it, then the second thing that people have to have on a team, number two, I love this as well. The second thing that people have to have is this: the heart to own it. This one's huge, and the key word there is heart, right? Do people have the care, the desire, the not even motivation, just the empathy, right, to own the solution to a problem? Do they have the ability to own that responsibility, to own that accountability? Do they have the desire even to get into that space and to be able to move through that space effectively, right? If they have that ability, if they have the heart to own it after they have the courage to see it, then success is coming. Number three, the third step is this one. And I love this word, particularly because I'm going through right now a study in Proverbs, right? Book of Wisdom, right? And I love this word. I love this idea around this concept that the folks at the Oz Principle created. Because you could have the knowledge to solve a problem, and you can have the desire to solve a problem. You can even have had the courage to see it, but without the wisdom to solve it, okay? Without the wisdom to solve a problem, you don't really have anything. The wisdom to solve it, along with the courage and the heart, right, go together. So courage, heart, wisdom. Wisdom is more than just having the intellectual sort of tactical capability to be able to do it. It's more than just you teaching your team as a leader, hey, this is what we tactically do here, and this is what we tactically do there. Wisdom is understanding the why of applying the solution in the appropriate spot. Wisdom is huge when getting into a space where maybe the holding on to accountability might be lacking. It's huge, right? And so we have to think about accountability. We have to think about solving the victim cycle and breaking people out of the victim cycle in terms of wisdom. Wisdom is often underrated, but I actually think because of the current workplace disruption and the current things that we're going through, wisdom will actually begin to take more of a center stage in how we lead folks. Finally, the last step in breaking the victim cycle and in getting folks towards accountability as a leader, the last piece is this one, number 4. And I love this fourth one too. And this one's really gigantic because if you don't have this one, all the courage, the heart, and the wisdom in the world won't matter. And it's this. Do you have the means to do it? Means is a tactical question, right? Do we actually have the means to take on responsibility? Do we have the means when accountability is thrust upon us to actually step up to the challenge and say, yeah, that's me. I made this. I'll stand in. Accountability and having the means to do the thing that you know you need to do is all about will. And a lot of people don't like to talk about will. A lot of people don't like to talk about that inner drive or motivation. And it's mixed up with a whole lot of other things like internal and external motivators, things like where your locus of control is, who's in charge, power, influence, all persuasion. All of these areas come together in this idea of, do you have the means to do it? And so the Oz principle lays this out very clearly. In order to break the victim cycle, and you as a leader need to be looking for these 4 areas in order to break the victim cycle and guide teams towards more accountability. Number 1, do people have the courage to see a problem? Number 2, do people have the heart to own the solution to the problem? Number 3, do people have the wisdom on the team collectively and individually to solve it? And then number 4, do people on the team have the means or the will to do it? All right. Now we've got a description of what accountability and responsibility is. We've looked at the victim cycle and we've figured that out. Now we understand how to move past the victim cycle. Finally, I'm going to close in our last few minutes together. And thank you for joining me on this live stream. You can always pick this up again. We're going to save this as a video right here on Facebook. And of course, you can pick it up again right there on YouTube. So we'll be taking these videos as we've been doing. We'll put them right on YouTube so you can share them around with friends and followers, people who may not necessarily be on Facebook. And of course, we will embed these videos as we've been doing and share them on our website at www.hsconsultingandtraining.com, the home of all of our workshops, which can all be delivered remotely or live streamed via Cisco WebEx or Zoom. And of course, we will be offering all of these videos as online courses so we can talk with you more and engage with you more around this space of leading remote teams in effective ways in times of workplace disruption. All right. What are some tips, right? What are some things that leaders can do right now with the last few minutes that we've got? What can they do right now in order to lead teams through accountability? What are the things that they can set up right now, immediately today? For some of us, we've been working from home for the last 4 to 8 weeks. For some of us, it's only been maybe the last 2 to 3 weeks. And so now leaders are beginning to think accountability, 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 accountability. How do I establish accountability? Well, the first one is utilizing the impact and either doing this either via video or via voice of one-on-one check-ins and meetings. These one-on-one check-ins and meetings should really focus on a few areas, but the biggest one is practical You're utilizing one-on-one meetings and one-on-one check-ins for practical trust development. When you're leading a team that's remote, you might be the linchpin, right? You might be the core person at the center of that team as the leader or the manager. You might be the person that everybody else spins around, which means one-on-one meetings, one-on-one check-ins become hugely important and hugely critical for your success. I strongly recommend one-on-one meetings, even in an in-person environment. And it's interesting, when I tell this to leaders, many of them say, well, I don't really have time for that in my day. I don't really have time to do a one-on-one check-in. Look, it's even more critical to do that when you're leading remote teams, because when people on teams have a high level of individual autonomy, who will they merge to? Particularly if they are in environments like at home, or even if they're in a hybrid environment where there might be a lot of disruption or distraction going on. How are they going to maintain that focus? How are they going to maintain what they've got going on with the team and with you in order to, of course, avoid the traps of the victim cycle, which they may fall into, but then also to make sure that they're still engaged with the team. I don't know any other way that you're going to get there other than establishing a one-on-one meeting. And I don't care if you do it via voice or via phone, one-on-one is the way to go. Number 2, what you're going to want to do is, and this is the second step, establish this. Okay. Establish clear expectations, right, with enforced consequences. This is also huge, right? So clear expectations doesn't mean that expectations don't shift on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't mean that when you're leading a remote team, maybe one day the expectations are here and another day they're here and another day they're here. Right now, you're operating in a dynamic environment. Right now, you're operating in a dynamic space where things are constantly shifting, right? Well, in a constantly shifting dynamic environment, one-on-one meetings where expectations are clear and consequences are reinforced can go a long way to getting your team through the accountability matrix, right? And getting them out of a victim cycle. Heck, it can even go a long way to not even allowing them to fall into those victim cycle traps in the first place. In particular, ignore, deny, and confusion, tell me what to do, okay? Number 3, the third thing that you want to do is you want to, and people use the term interchangeably in organizations, coaching and mentoring. I think that a lot of things that we do, a lot of the practices that we do aren't necessarily focused on mentoring, because mentoring is about a one-on-one deep relationship. But coaching is about something else. And so when you're thinking about moving your team as a leader towards accountability, you want to really think about it in terms of coaching. And I recommend and you can research this and Google this yourself as a leader. We don't really have time to go into it today. Maybe we'll do another live stream focused on this for leading remote teams. But I recommend coaching teams based in the GROW model. Okay, so the GROW model really focuses on goals, reality. It focuses on ownership. And of course, it focuses on the will to go in a particular direction, the means, right, to go in a particular direction. But the big thing about the GROW model is it really focuses on goals. So in order to gain accountability, heck, in order to encourage people to take responsibility, you've got to coach them. That's really the key thing. And if you don't use the GROW model, if you want to use another model, if you're an ICF certified coach, or if you know people on your staff who are, coaching is huge. Now, don't get me wrong. You can still mentor people on your team. You can still mentor people in that team space. But mentoring is much more about a personal relationship. And coaching is much more about short-term to mid-term getting us through a particular project or a particular set of expectations or towards a particular goal or outcome. So that's number 3. Coaching is going to be huge for you as a remote leader. And if you've never coached people before, or if you feel uncomfortable coaching, I would do some research. ICF, the International Coaching Federation, has great resources and tools on their website. So does the Society for Human Resource Management and the Human Capital Institute. I would look into all of those to be able to help you figure out how to be a better coach, or even just how to be comfortable coaching folks, even in one-on-one meetings. Finally, when you onboard people, this is number 4, okay? On board, if you can, although these days you may not be able to, but onboard people in this way. Onboard partially in person. This is hugely important, right? Because when you onboard people in person, rather than just fully remotely, okay, you give folks an opportunity to have those textural moments that occur in a face-to-face interaction. You allow them to build relationships with you. Now, again, this may not be easy to do if you're hiring a new person during this time where workplace disruption is going on left and right. You may not be able to onboard them in person. You may not even be able to meet with them in person because of the laws or the statutes, the public health things that are going on in your particular space. But the second you have the capacity or the ability to get in person with it, to get involved with that person, you should take advantage of it. Okay. You should be getting involved with that person as much as you can in person. Finally, the last space where you want to focus on as a leader when you're pushing people through or towards accountability, pushing the team towards accountability, is this one. This is the last space, and then we'll close. You want to do this. And this one is really hard, particularly for leaders sometimes, because they know so much about where they are going that they very often fail to consistently remind the team of where they're going. So define success clearly and repeatedly. This one is gigantic. If you can define success clearly and repeatedly, then team members will grow in accountability. They'll feel more tied and attached to overall goals and outcomes. And of course, they will feel as though they are not just being a victim to disruption, but they will feel as though now we can take on responsibility. And then your level of accountability will go up. And of course, your level of ownership for a project, for an outcome, for a goal will automatically increase. Now, all of those tips, all 5 of those, establishing and having one-on-one meetings on a regular basis, onboarding partially in person if you can, and as soon as you can immediately, coaching based in the GROW model, right? Coaching individuals rather than really exclusively focusing on mentoring them, establishing clear expectations with enforced consequences, and of course, defining success clearly and repeatedly. These 5 tips, right? We got from a great individual named Claire Lew, L-E-W, and she runs a great organization called Know Your Team with a great tool that can help you mentor and coach individuals and keep track of all those little interactions so that you can do that outcome better. Well, those are the few areas that you can think about when leading teams, particularly leading remote teams, through accountability. Number 1, understanding the difference between accountability and responsibility. And of course, utilizing clear and unambiguous language so that people understand where they're going and what's happening. Number 2, avoiding the traps of the victim cycle and understanding the different steps in the victim cycle. And there are 6 of them, which we talked about today. Then, of course, enabling teams to move past the victim cycle through courage, heart, through the application of courage, heart, wisdom, and of course, will or means, right? And then finally, the tactical areas in working in a remote environment that you have to focus on. And there are 5 of them that we covered today. So one-on-one meetings, onboarding partially in person if you can, leading and establishing clear expectations with consequences that can be enforced, clearly defining success repeatedly over and over again, and of course, coaching, or even, if you would like, mentoring based in a particular model. We like the GROW model here, but any coaching model that will move your team remotely and move your remote team towards success and through accountability will be useful for you as a leader. All right, with the last sort of minute and a half that I have here today, I want to thank you for your time and attention this morning. It's been 45 minutes. And so I want to really encourage you to go back and look at this video again. And don't worry, we'll have it up here on Facebook in about the next hour. Okay, we'll have a replay of it about the next hour. We will also have a copy of this video on our Facebook, on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So you can just go to YouTube and search for Human Services Consulting and Training, and it'll be right up there on YouTube, and you'll be able to share it around and watch it as many times as you like. We'll also have this video embedded on our website at hsconsultingandtraining.com, okay, /resources, where we'll also have a one sheet where we will establish all of these resources. We'll put on all the links, and we'll have a one sheet where you'll be able to click on, download for free, and get more of this information. Finally, we would encourage you to share this video, share this information among people you know who are struggling with leading remote teams through accountability. Perhaps this is the first time they've led remote teams. Perhaps this is the first time they've worked with individuals who are in a remote environment. We want you to be successful here at Human Services Consulting and Training, and we seek to help you get there in a timely fashion. And don't worry, next week we're going to have another one of these live stream trainings, and we look forward to seeing you then. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you.